Great. There's a lot that needs to be done to bring democracy back. But one of the things we've talked about a lot, but not so much today, is governance per se. How do you go about trying to make all of this stuff happen? And for this session, we're going to be talking about tools pretty much across the board. And I don't think it needs a lot of introduction other than that. So I'm going to talk. All right. One of the questions is what has changed? We've talked about that. One of the things we haven't focused on is that at the time of the Constitution, there were 30,000 representatives, 30,000 citizens or voters per representative, and now we're at 800,000, which presents its own complexity problem. Danielle Allen, a university professor at Harvard, would like to increase the size of the House of Representatives to accommodate that. And I cannot imagine Washington, D.C. with that many more representatives, all of them refusing to talk to each other. Anyway, and then what I put down next was the progress in technology. And I interestingly read a book recently called The Future is Coming Faster Than You Think, which is a really fascinating book. And it says that AI is hardly the last story about what's coming next. So next, you got it? Okay. So how is governance designed at the program and activity level? How do we avoid failure and unintended consequences? How do we keep up with this changing world? And who the heck does the designing in the first place? And then, of course, one of my favorite quotes from John Bradivus. And which provides interesting stories about bad feedback loops. Anyway, for anybody who doesn't happen to be aware of it, wonderful, crucial for governance, cybernetic law is Ashby's law of requisite variety, which says that the variety of an effective controller must equal or exceed the variety of the controlled. Now, imagine a chess game when you have 3 queens and your opponent has none. You've got greater variety. You think the other person's going to vote against you? Ha, no chance. Anyway, I want to mention, to me, variety, the Ashby's law is crucial to governance because almost inevitably you want to have fewer people in government than you have as the citizenry. If you don't, you have another problem. Now, 2 aspects of this that I want to mention, which come into Ashby's law, is one, some friends and I used to eat Greek food at a restaurant near Capitol Hill, within the shadow of the hill. And this was during Nixon's wage and price control period. And during phase 4, he had frozen all the prices on wages and prices and stuff. And so we went in for our souvlaki, and it turned out the portions of souvlaki were getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, from the federal government, you can try to see if you can control wages and prices, but how many more people would it take? How much more variety would you have to have in order to try to measure the quantity of the souvlaki as it got smaller, without even mentioning the quality of the souvlaki if you had to lower that? And another thing, another one of my absolute favorites, I assume everyone has seen the signs that say speed hump. Well, a speed hump is like 6 or 8 feet long, 12 maybe sometimes, 6 inches deep, and they're not on interstates, but they're on pretty much back, country, not country roads, but suburban roads. And what they're called in Great Britain is sleeping policemen, because they're there regardless. You only pay for them once, and they're almost indestructible. You never have to hire the policeman, train the policeman, pay them, pay their health care, pay their retirement. So you've got a way of increasing the control over the speed of roads without having to do a hell of a lot of increasing variety. You just build the damn speed humps, and that works pretty well. We have a new system in this country, which is getting even better at that, which is you have these cameras hanging up in the air. They take pictures of you, they measure your speed, take pictures of your license plate, find out who you are, and then send you a ticket for $100. I just paid one yesterday. So that also has a good way of trying to control variety without having to have a police car or a speed camera, radar camera every 100 yards. So variety, controlling variety is really key to governance per se. Next, please. One of the problems gets to be that there are a lot of different ways that government can try to do things. And this is the list published in 2003 by Lester Salomon in his book, The Tools of Government. I taught a section of the course at Johns Hopkins for several years. And if you look at all of these different ways that government can try to change behavior and think of it in terms of variety, that's just the beginning. Because, and you know, don't take notes because the list may change. It may have changed by now. The book was last published in 2003. Next slide, please. But this is the problem. Tools are just categories like cars and apples. Each instance is developed separately within whatever federal program or state or local program it is. So you start by saying, okay, we're going to do regulation because that's the category. But then how do you do that? And what are the penalties and who checks in it and so forth and so on? It turns out that each of these programs, which comes under the heading of a tool, will succeed or fail individually for reasons of design. So, and they never talk to each other. So you got Silo City here one more time. We do not, I say this as a graduate of Georgetown Law School, we don't have a language that describes in detail what makes a particular instance of a tool a success or a failure. To my knowledge, there is no one from GAO to the Hill staff or whatever that understands the complexity of programs, the possibility of variations, and can come up with tools, come up with an instance of a tool which will necessarily or more likely work in a given circumstance. The original tool, as we all know, is a hammer. And there was a point in the late 19th century when Birmingham, England was making 400 different hammers. So you got a problem if you think that's your only tool, a hammer. Well, you got the little ones, you got the big ones, whatever. So the thing that I find most useful thinking about how to develop a more detailed, explicit way of looking at how those tools can be here and there more useful, not useful, was going to a book by Christopher Alexander called A Pattern Language, which his concept of a pattern language, find a little something that works and then apply it other places. It works for software, it works for architecture, it's worked in a number of places. The entry under pattern language on Wikipedia just goes on and on and on. One of the ones that, and he doesn't talk about why things work. He says, this works, use it in designing the house that you're trying to build. He was an architect. This doesn't work, don't do it. One of my favorite examples is that people, quote, people will not use a porch which is less than 6 feet deep. Doesn't say why, you know, no explanation, but he and his team had looked at a lot of buildings and a lot of porches. There ain't nothing on those porches if they're less than 6 feet deep except storage. People won't sit on them. They don't like them. Anyway, and he has 1,000 of those tools. So we need a discipline of government design, which we do not have, to try to figure out what makes an individual tool work and how can we take those lessons to the next use of that tool or whatever the case may be. Sadly, we are a little low on cybernetics programs in American universities. This is an aspect of cybernetics, but we need to have some combination of public policy and law school and so forth and so on. As mentioned earlier, there are now 2,000 lobbyists for every congressman and senator. So at least some of those people should have an idea when they're proposing a piece of legislation, whether that piece is likely to work, if they care. Okay. So we don't have that, does not exist at the present time. So that's the most detailed thing that I want to mention. And you're already at the next one. You're so ahead of me. You're such a blessing. Something which would be different, which comes into the discussion of artificial intelligence in its less harmful fact, is that at the present time, a certain amount of congressional, where's that card telling me when I can quit? Darn. Oh, okay. That there are a lot of opportunities for citizens to comment on proposed regulations. It started largely with environmental projects, but it also gets into regulatory stuff and a variety of places where regular human beings have an opportunity, not that they ever find out about it mostly, to comment on things the government is considering doing. Now, most of those things have already been predetermined. In other words, they've been decided by somebody that, all right, that we need to do X. Okay, what do you think? And a better solution would be, I think, to have more proposals coming out of congressional committee before they're finalized and then put out for public comment. And then you roll your eyes and say, well, there are 800,000 citizens, voters for every representative. Well, we also don't have enough young lawyers to be able to go through all of those comments and try to summarize them and so forth and so on before they all become lobbyists. Anyway, so I think that there's a wonderful role for artificial intelligence, which would say that anybody can comment on these things, which are then listed and produced in common websites and so forth and so on. So if you have an interest, which not everybody would, but I think it would increase, they would increase the number of people doing it if the comments which came in were collected, categorized, described, all of those other verbs we could use for artificial intelligence. And so the word went back out again very quickly, not necessarily to individuals, but they went back out again in the same website, whatever, which said that 100,000 people have commented on the proposed regulation to do X, and here's the distribution of what people think. And here's a comment typical of each one of those 5 categories, distribution, whatever. Because one of the problems one of the problems that we face is, which we haven't talked about much, is people feel disconnected from government. And so question is, how do you do a better job at connecting them with government? Because we pay for it, damn it. We would like to know that they're listening to us. They may not change, but if they say, we heard you, but that's not where the comments come out, or we heard you and yes, everyone agrees that we should do X, Y, Z, then we're back into closer communication with government, which could obviously be done at all levels. ChatGPT isn't restricted to federal comments. So I think we've got 2 sets of tools. One of them is real simple, apply the AI, bring people closer together. The other one is, in the nature of the actions that government takes, we do not understand the complexity of the programs, and we do not design them in such a way that they're likely to work any more often. My last slide is stolen from whose copy? Has your copy of the book? Yeah. One of my favorite books. He does such a great job about other ways that people can become engaged in governance as well. So I'll leave that one up and I won't talk about it because I'm told.
But you can call up the next people. That's what you're a facilitator.
I want help with facilitating. So the next one is the fabled Andy Williams.
I'm going to try to play a video. I'm just going to share my screen to do that right now.
There are limits to the problems we can solve with existing problem-solving processes. For example, A bias towards believing the correct answer can be obtained through consensus might make some problems unsolvable. Consensus gives the correct answer only in certain cases, such as high signal-to-noise problems, for which the majority intuitively understands the entire problem, and the most correct answer can be obtained from consensus. Low signal-to-noise problems are those for which as few as a single expert might have the ability to calculate the correct solution. High bandwidth problems are those for which each individual can only understand a small part of the problem, and each individual's problem-solving effort must be carefully orchestrated to solve a different part of the problem in order to come up with a coherent overall solution. Where these limits are outside our ability to see and where they impact problems of existential importance, it is existentially important that we remove these limits. One limit that we currently can't surpass is that we collectively lack the capacity to assess the impact of networks of solutions. As compared to things that compete to achieve impact on their own, networks of things can cooperate to vastly increase their impact. Networks can also make impact self-sustaining. Things that compete to achieve impact on their own can achieve far less impact. Part of general collective intelligence is finding those networks. Conceptual case studies, for example, suggest that networks of cooperating interventions might achieve a 750 times increase in impact on job creation per program dollar. Other conceptual case studies suggest that networks of interventions in healthcare might reduce healthcare costs by up to 40%, reducing expenditures in countries such as the US by as much as $1 trillion. Those who are only looking for political solutions might be some of the smartest people, but they are missing one thing: that nature has already developed this network-based mechanism for solving problems outside the realm of complexity that human beings are capable of resolving, and that nature has demonstrated this solution to work for billions of years. All biological systems, from cells to the human brain to groups of people, have this innate intelligence which at all scales solves a problem that might be referred to as general collective optimization. The proposed collective intelligence-based program to accelerate achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SIPAW SDG program, defines an experiment to create a smart, sustainable village in which a GCI is used to help citizens organize their own network of interventions to increase their level of access to amenities such as healthcare, education, and retirement benefits. If successful, this experiment can potentially be replicated everywhere, and the more it is replicated, the more collectively intelligent it becomes. General collective intelligence is just emerging as a science. In comparison to the billions that have been spent on AI, potentially zero research dollars have been spent on general collective intelligence research to date. If it is true that only collective intelligence can make AI safe, then by ignoring this field we are effectively racing to make AI more dangerous, in the hope that we will control a more dangerous AI than anyone else in the end. The collective intelligence between us can be exponentially more intelligent than any leader, than any political system, than any ideology. If so, then it can increase our capacity to solve whatever are the most pressing problems you believe exist, whether they be achieving sustainable economic growth, or addressing poverty, making AI safe, or addressing the environmental degradation that has been associated with climate change. For all of these reasons, failing to explore this emerging science is a risk we can't afford.
Hi there. So can everyone hear me now?
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Yes.
I want to read a short statement. General collective intelligence is a virtually unknown concept, but it might be important on an unprecedented scale from the perspective of the entire history of human civilization. Looking at the natural world as an example, single-celled organisms strongly tend to compete through solving the problem of optimizing their individual circumstances, while cells in multicellular organisms strongly tend to cooperate in networks to solve the problem of optimizing their collective circumstances. Using a new approach to modeling the functionality in biological systems, systems, it's beginning to become clear that every single technology in existence is invisibly constrained in the same way. As technology advances, it gets better and better at solving problems, and it can either increase its ability to solve the problem of optimizing individual circumstances and visibly or invisibly increasing the centralization of power and control, or it can be designed with a network approach to increase its ability to solve the problem of optimizing our collective circumstances. This invisible pull towards the centralization of power, control, and resources that occurs without a general collective intelligence is a kind of gravity. And there's no principle and no way of life we hold dear for ourselves and our children that is certain to survive the crushing force of this gravity, as the lack of collective intelligence in technological advances like AI cause us to fall closer and closer to its source. The most serious challenge to implementing this general collective intelligence might be the scientific establishment, exemplified by the establishment in the collective intelligence research community. So research suggests that those in established and prominent positions tend to seek to remove risk to themselves by making decisions based on consensus, as opposed to reasoning solely based on logic. Since empirical evidence removes the risk of having to depend on one's own logic, this includes restricting research to that based on empirical evidence. Where research is too new and only theoretical models exist. But no consensus is possible for newly emerging disciplines such as general collective intelligence that no one knows about. And no one can know about these ideas if the scientific establishment, represented by the most prestigious and highly read journals, refuse to publish such theoretical models so that the research funding organizations can even become aware of them and provide funding to make empirical research possible. So this is a vicious circle that those in comfortable positions might not see as immediately harmful to themselves, but it's profoundly harmful to all of us. So just finishing off, general collective intelligence can transform the way every engineering discipline engineers every product or service. It can transform the way every scientific discipline practices science, and it can transform the impact of our collective decision-making. So I don't know the answer to the problem of how we counter the disincentives against the comfortable scientific establishment embracing such disruption. But if general collective intelligence is possibly the biggest potential source of impact on the most important problems that collectively face us, an answer should be found. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Just a comment. One of the recommendations we're working on in the forum is a new NSF, the National Science Foundation. The natural world of analytic reductive science has done amazing things. But in the beginning of Novum Orgum of Francis Bacon in 1620, he says it's only for the physical estate of man. It's not for the religious, not for the social, not for the political. We need a national systems foundation that deals with ideas of collective intelligence about networks that Andy and all these panels are talking about.
Amazing.
Yes.
Which would certainly include the design of government, tool by tool, example by example. Now we're looking for Claudia Westerman and Teresa Hosking.
So architecture of the conversation comments. 1 moment. There are discursive practices that we typically overlook because we view discourse within the context of very particular sets of rules. We are so habituated to our way of seeing that we cannot see otherwise. Traveling to other lands, exiling oneself might be useful to gain other points of view. Please join us on a journey to China and back.
The inspiration for our research came from witnessing numerous cultural activities taking place in public space, from dance to martial arts to full-scale opera. Collective cultural practices as political participation were encouraged during the Mao era, when cultural activities played a key role in workers' education and participation. During Deng Xiaoping's opening up period that started in 1979, focus was on the creation of new cultural public spaces formed through collaborations between community groups and the state. The idea of public space as defined by rights of access and citizenship is new in China. Modern China is witnessing the wide-scale transformation of post-industrial spaces into new public space. An example is the Huangpu River in Shanghai, where 45 kilometers of post-industrial waterside space has been transformed to create a new public sitting room for Shanghai. 2015 guidance for public square dancing states that the government will make use of commercial plazas and open space in urban and rural areas to provide space for cultural activities. The spaces are managed by community volunteers. Community groups, for example, dance groups, will book time slots to use the space. We argue that community-led space plays a major role in a more spatialized participatory model of democracy currently emerging in China.
When I arrived, there are 3 groups. All groups dance in lines. A battery-powered speaker placed in front of each provides the music. Each group has its own selection of songs. The group of dancers closest to the street appears to be the most organized. At times, the dancers use props. This group has folding fans, another has ribbons. Later in the evening, the group next to the market dissolves its lines and engages for the next hour in a form of ballroom dancing. Between the groups, a man practices Tai Chi. Some children run after a ball. At the plaza's north entrance, a man has placed a mobile karaoke station. Some passers-by stop and sing.
The democratic model emerging in China has been likened by many scholars to political theorist Jürgen Habermas's deliberative model of democracy. The deliberative model of democracy requires a strong public sphere. Public opinion formed through discursive practice creates a regulatory counterbalance to the state. A key difference to the democratic model emerging in China from Habermas's idea of the public sphere is that in China, the public sphere is a proletariat or working class, rather than the bourgeois or middle-class public sphere put forward by Habermas. For sociologist Junshi Chan, public leisure is an important cultural terrain on which new social relations and cultural identities are enacted, negotiated, and performed. He argues that cultural performance in China plays an important role in the production of collective identity and can be viewed as a collective project of self-actualization.
Spatial practice in China supports the structuring of society into a sophisticated network of concentric circles that embeds individuals in a set of horizontal and very vertical relations. It is a network, but it is not based on ideas of decentralization. Structured by overlapping concentric circles, the Chinese network model situates individuals. While the Western model of a networked society is defined through the relationship between individuals and the state and relies on constitutionality that emphasizes the equality of each individual versus an abstract organization such as the state, at the center of the Chinese network is differentiation. Individuals are circulated by interpersonal relations. There are astonishing similarities between this Chinese network model and the model that the cybernetician Stafford Beer has used to conceive viable systems. We could maybe also say sustainable systems. We can keep the idea of a viable system in mind as we now return to the question of democratic participation and of community. The processes we have observed in public space in China follow a logic of centralization and decentralization at the same time, ensuring both autonomy and cohesion. Autonomy of the agents, dance groups, skateboarding groups, etc., and cohesion through dynamic agreements between these groups on how to use their public space. The processes we have observed embrace play, experimentation. Experimentations is also key in cybernetician Stafford Beer's viable system model. Looking at public space in China has helped us to understand that there are assumptions, ideas, and models that we do not normally question. These assumptions structure what we imagine, what kind of alternative futures we can conceive. As stated before, the Western network model focuses on equality of individuals versus an abstract entity. However, community is never abstract. The great American urbanist Jane Jacobs knew this. The atomizing of the city has put a practical end to an essential component of public space, the overlay of function in a single territory, which creates complexities of experience on that turf, said Richard Sennett.
In the West, we have seen an elimination of democratic public space through neoliberalism and continuous privatization that can be seen to have greatly privileged the private realm, at the same time as de-democratizing our city spaces.
Spatial practice is the basis of democratic participation. Spatial practice should be considered part of the discourse on democracy. Cities and communities must ensure the creation of truly public spaces.
Our suggestion is for a refocus and reimagination of democratic public space in the West, the creation of spaces that are governed by the public and produced through local networks and differentiated activities of the social.
And with this, we are at the end. And if you scan the QR code, you can actually download the slides and a background paper.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Next is Carrie Turner.
Okay, so I'm now in presentation mode. Is that clear to everybody?
Yes, very good.
Great. Okay, well, I'll make a start. Hello, everybody. I'm Carrie Turner, and today I'm going to be introducing you to an initiative created by myself and Mark Pearson, who I believe is also here, called Relocalizing Creativity. The way I'm going to go through this is using a model that we use ourselves with neighborhoods, and that's these 6 questions that you see on the right. So today I'm going to be talking about who I am, why I'm here today, which is to help make the world a better place, and how I'm doing that is through one idea, helping neighborhoods to see the systems that are themselves and around them. And ultimately, it's about applying that to absolutely everywhere on Earth. 1 million neighborhoods is our ambition. And that's working with community activists and young people. And basically, that's for the rest of my life, and as long as anybody else cares about it. And what I'm going to also talk a little bit about is what we've been doing so far, what we've learned, and what we plan to do next. And then finally, how you can help and get involved. So I found this little booklet, which I wrote when I was 10 years old. And in it, chapter 6 or 5, I don't know what it says there, I said my ambition. And basically, my ambition was either to be a teacher or to be a librarian or to work with animals, because I love animals. That's what I wanted, but the way it turned out was more like this. So I went to university, did a first degree in maths and a master's in operational research, which is maths business. And then I went into consultancy, business consultancy. And I use systems tools to optimize organizations, essentially, to enable corporations to make vast amounts of shareholder value. And I did that in mainstream consulting for 20 years. with Deloitte, Coopers and Lybrand, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then IBM. And then for the last 18 years, I've been freelance. And you can see I'm still passionate about animals, especially horses. And essentially what I've been doing for the last, calculated it, about 16 or 17 years is trying to change the world by helping anybody that will listen to think systemically. And just a list of some of my clients. I've worked with a vast number of clients. I've lost count. It's over 60. And I've worked for virtually every UK government department too. And I've worked all around the world. I've put on here some asterisks of the places that I've worked. So you can see very clearly where I've worked and also where I haven't, mainly in Europe, America, and Australia. A little bit of work in India as well. All the time I'm working with a model that I call the 3X model. This is the way I operate and learn, both in my work and in my general life. We're all experiencers, I believe. We're all having experiences all the time. I think it's the only thing that we can be clear about as human beings. What I'd like us to do as human beings is to complete that cycle with 2 other X's. I'd like us to explore our experiences together, to understand them better, and then together to design experiments which help us to learn about the way that our systems work. So we start to have experiences again, new experiences that once again we can explore. Lots and lots of other stuff on this slide that I'm not going to go into today. But essentially what we're talking about here is curiosity, connection, and courage. And I think those 3 C's are very much needed in the world today. Because what we've got is a lot of problems. These problems are problems that we've had for an awful long time. This is a quote from a 2011 survey on the big problems in the world. And over on the right, we knew back in the early 1970s, through the Limits to Growth work done by the MIT and the world model, which we see some of the output of on that graph at the bottom. And you can see we're about to tip off the edge of a cliff. Which is very interesting because these problems just keep persisting. And that's a really interesting question to ask. Why do they persist? And some people have had a go at answering that question. Mainly, the source is thinking. So Edgar Morin says here, to recognize and understand the problems of the world, we need a reform in thinking. It is the fundamental question for education. I think that reflects what Albert Einstein said even earlier, that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Yeah, when we created them. And Peter Senge, again, more recently, today's solutions, tomorrow's problems. Okay, so we're starting to see a pattern here. And what have we done about it? Well, in the main, we tend to blame and protest. We point the finger at other people. And we go out on the streets waving banners. And over on the right, you can see we got Greta Thunberg. What did she say? I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic and act as if the house was on fire. Yeah, that's not a solution. That is not a solution. That's creating fear. And when we're in fear, we can't design solutions. We just can't think. And we certainly can't think systemically. And I think there's a lot of fear out there in the world at the moment. And the other thing we've been doing is trying to avoid fundamental changes in our lives. And we have a lot of bad behaviors that get perpetuated because of that, in particular consumerism. And what I see is surface solutions with lots of unintended consequences, solutions that are about masking symptoms, not fixing root causes at all, low leverage solutions that create small changes, but don't actually fix the system at its base. And that's what we need. That's what we are ready for right now. I think in terms of governance, that's not helped at all, because I think a majority actually believe that a higher power is going to come and fix it for them, that it's not their responsibility, and that all they have to do is just follow rules. And over on the right there, you see Grenfell Tower burning. So Greta Thunberg talked about fires. Well, there was a real fire back in London in 2018, and a lot of people died. And analysis that I did of that fire, not of the fire itself and what caused it, but of why the people actually died. They died because they followed rules. They died because they didn't think about the system that they were in, and they died because they didn't act in concert. But there's a very powerful story from Grenfell Tower that not many people know, and that was of a lady on the 10th floor who actually looked at what was happening. She looked out her window, she saw the fire rising, and she thought, I can't stay put in this building as the fire brigade have asked me to do. I have to get out because otherwise I'll die. And she thought, how can I save the maximum number of people at the same time? And she saw that she'd got resources at her disposal. She'd got water in her flat, and she put the plugs in all the sinks and baths, and she turned on the taps full blast and told everybody on her floor to do the same thing. And then they got out of there. They survived, and they probably helped a lot of other people just above them to survive too. That's systems action, yeah? That's working for the good of the whole. That's saving lives. Because otherwise, the kind of behaviours that we have at the moment and the solutions that we have at the moment are incredibly expensive for us and the planet. For myself, what I've seen is that focusing on shareholder value, especially of individual parts called corporations, is not going to save us. That is what's really creating our problem. All businesses optimizing parts and not considering the whole. The loss of community that we've had through this point about not taking responsibility, it's not my responsibility, and growing the wrong things, really. There's not a problem with growth. It's just growing the things that are taking resources away that we can't replenish quickly enough. That's the main issue, but there are lots and lots of things we can grow that don't make that happen. And Mark has 3 questions that he always asks and that I'd love you all to ask yourself. Who is we? Where is home? And how long will we care? Because what he always says is that those questions are always already answered, and they're always too small to solve the problem that we're looking at. So it's worth reflecting on that. Okay, what we really need is a rebalancing. Nothing too extreme. We need to be very careful about how we rebalance, but we need to rebalance repetition, which we get a lot of rewards for at the moment, and creativity, because by golly, do we need creativity? And our school system is not producing it. Our school system inhibits collaboration and it inhibits creativity by rewarding repetition. Yeah, the individual versus the collective, mind versus body, machines versus manual, me versus others, differentiation versus integration, and big business and government versus neighborhoods. All these things really, really, truly need to be rebalanced. And our idea at Relocalizing Creativity is that we start to look and see the systems that we're a part of, and we participate in doing that actively. We have a tool called a causal loop diagram, or the word that I've now converted it to is a community loop drawing, which essentially allows people to be able to capture their understanding and make explicit their understanding of the way that their system works, their system being their neighborhood, and therefore how to optimize it, where the leverage points are in that system. Really, really important to be able to do that and to go out and do the experiments and communities to start learning from the system itself. And we do that by having conversations, what we call campfire conversations. Campfire conversations and cave drawings, yeah? It sounds like it's going backwards, but it's not. It's very much aided by modern thinking and technology. And it's about us all being able to share our understanding, because when we pool our understanding, we become much more powerful. And we're aiming to take that, as I said, to absolutely every neighborhood in the world. And you're going to hear from one of them later in the next panel, Chris Casillas, who's working in Superior, Arizona. He'll be talking about his experience taking some of this forward in his community. We intend to spread through an exponential spread model called See One, Do One, Teach One, because without exponential, we won't make it in time, is my personal belief. And what we want to do is to have neighborhood activists to be our apprentices, ideally one per neighborhood. And what you can do about that is you can help us to identify them. Maybe you might be an activist yourself. Maybe you might be interested in learning how to build community loop drawings and take your community through this exercise. I hope some of you will. One slide here, just some links and how to contact me if you're interested. And the final word I'll leave to this young lady, who had this written on her sweatshirt at the last at the last workshop that I ran in Spain a couple of weeks ago, that the best way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Well, there's another person here with a silent K at the beginning of his name, and I find so few of those people. It's always such a pleasure. So, Richard Knowles.
This afternoon, I wanted to share with you a powerful new model that's great for conversations in communities to help people come together to solve their own problems. In reading some of Christopher Alexander's work, it's one of the models that really fits in with the way he's thinking about things, because it can be used anywhere, with any group of people. And I want to share this with you by illustrating a case study that we engaged in. Earlier this year, a big project was coming to a head in Tampa, Florida, a $1.3 billion project to build a new stadium.
Richard? Yeah, he's got it.
They're going to build a new stadium to replace the one that was built back in the late 70s for the Tampa Bay Rays baseball team, and develop the 85-acre parking lot that's surrounding that. Back when it was first built, that part of the city was taken from the minority community with little or no reimbursement for the people. And there's lots of ill will that's latent in the community about this. And so the questions are coming up, what do we do? And the League of Women Voters had the idea that we needed to touch base and get to hear from the voice of the people who were not normally involved in any of the conversations, the people who are left out. And we call that the voice of the voiceless.
Click.
It changed?
Next one. Yeah, there you go.
Going the wrong
There you go.
direction.
You got it.
Okay. The first step in this process was to invite people from the community to come together to share what their questions were for the mayor and the developers. The questions they were felt needed to be asked to try to address some of the ills from the past and not repeat them, and to provide some affordable housing for the people in the city. And the people came together in January of this year in two groups, of 123 and 1 and 12. And Clara, my wife here, and I facilitated this conversation among these people. Now, these were interesting groups in the sense that Claire and I did not know any of the people. Nobody in the room knew everyone. And it was just a collection of people from the community who were concerned about having their questions raised and heard. And so we had to figure out a way to very quickly build enough level of trust so that the people could begin to talk and think together. And that was really the first step. That began with a taco dinner, and as people gathered for the dinner, we circulated around and welcomed them and tried to make them feel comfortable. And we wanted to have orderly conversations. With a group of 23 strangers in a tense environment, things could degenerate very quickly into messy mess and not accomplish anything. So we were able to do that. And the tool that we use to do that is the cycle of intelligence. This is a tool that I've found always works, and no matter what kind of group, providing people are willing to talk together and listen. The cycle always begins with a question. And the question this night was, what questions do you want to bring for the mayor? So they can consider it and think about it. So as we gathered and had dinner and people came together, we had them sit in a large circle. And we began at the top of the figure with the question of, who are we? Identity. And everyone in the room gave their name, a little bit about where they were from. But every voice came into the room and was heard. And then we reminded everybody that our intention that night was to come up with the best questions we could for the mayor to consider. And the issues and the ambiguities we had to deal with was how to keep this conversation being purposeful and not one that would fall apart. The people agreed we should have respect and trust among ourselves. And we talked about these things. And so we developed a few ground rules, like one person speak at a time, no personal attacks, listen for understanding. And only after that did we begin to talk about what are your questions. This work needs to be done first. If we don't get clear on who we are, why we're here, and develop a shared awareness about the problems we're facing, and develop some ground rules, we get into big problems. Most groups, when they come together, they want to jump to the problem immediately. When that happens, they skip all this work, and this stuff then surfaces later in ugly ways. We found that if we can get this squared away, everything else goes very quickly. And we talked about the questions. And one thing that we did, and we sort of came up with it at the time, I couldn't have 23 people shouting out what questions they had, one over the other. So we asked each person to write down your one or two most compelling questions on a sheet of paper. Then Claire wrote them up on big chart pads in the wall. And everybody could see all the questions. They didn't know who raised which question. They talked together, they wandered around and looked at it and debated them. And gradually they sorted out the priority list, which ones were the most important they wanted to be sure. But all the questions were then submitted later on to the mayor. And one of the things we did as the meeting was winding up with the people was, will you all give Claire and me the permission to write these up without having you all edit those and take the time, because time was short. And they all agreed that they would allow us to do that. So I felt pretty good that feedback was, you know, we connected well enough to be able to do that, and they trusted us. And the questions were submitted to the mayor on time, but some of the people got real excited and decided we needed to have a proclamation read off the steps of City Hall. So, and bring these to the people. So they did that, which kind of surprised me. And coming out of this, a community support group was formed to begin to work with the mayor and the developers on this project to talk about the ball stadium, which everybody's excited about, but the affordable housing needs around this, which are very, very important. St. Pete is getting into a problem of so much expensive high rises being built that the regular sorts of folks are having a harder and harder time finding places to live. Apartments are being built quickly, but for $2,400 a month, you have to have a pretty good income. So this is what's going on with these things. And so the feedback coming out of this was that people said, this was really a good meeting. We want to do it again. We haven't been able to do it. But the community came together, addressing their problem, not our problem. Claire and I did nothing but ask questions. We did not have answers. These are not the kind of meetings where you want to bring in an outside expert, because the expert disempowers the group. People just sit back, well, the expert knows all the answers. They don't have to think. And it becomes a block. Sometimes we need an expert if we're going to try to do some particular technical program, but you don't start with the experts. The facilitator asks questions. And this is a relatively easy process to use. The language is simple, as you saw around the cycle of intelligence. And within a couple of sessions, almost anybody can lead another session using this tool. It may not be real smooth and elegant, but they'll get it pretty quickly. And the questions are simple. Now behind it is a whole bunch of science about complexity and chaos, complex adaptive systems, cybernetics. But nobody gives a darn. They just, does it work or not? And it works extremely well. And it can be done with any groups who want to have a question answered. And the focus is at the community, where the people know each other, where the people know the problems, and they can talk together and work out solutions. A good example just that happened in Buffalo last year. After the COVID epidemic, they started the kids going back to school and there weren't enough buses to get all the kids back. And they were having some kids get delivered at home at 9 o'clock at night. The community got together and talked about what they needed to do and decided to add another shift for the school, which meant the schools had to start at different times. And with 3 cycles of buses, they could get the kids to school and back. They thought there wasn't enough bus drivers, but there are lots of people applied, but very few were really qualified to do the work. Thank you. I have a handout here that you can pick up afterwards. It shows the cycle of intelligence, a little bit deeper information about the process enneagram, and then a model of the process enneagram that I put together to illustrate what our founding fathers went through when they were writing the Constitution. And what we look like today using the process enneagram model is a way to look at it. And I think our founders were using complexity and chaos and cybernetics quite intuitively. And they did it quite well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard Knowles.
Thank you, Mr. Knisley. Or as my German teacher used to say, canola.
Right. I like cannoli. I think we have one more speaker, a friend.
I'd like to thank you very much for staying because so far it's been a long day. We have another panel coming up afterwards. So I'm Michelle Friend. I'm a philosopher at George Washington University. And I've been working on a multi-criteria decision aid, which I call the institutional compass. And I'm going to introduce that to you. Oops, wrong way, that way. Good. Okay, so the order of go is that I'll be talking about the compass. This will be the majority of the talk because it's a new tool. It's something people are not familiar with. So I just have to explain how it works. Then we'll run very quickly through the concept of democracy as far as the tool is concerned. And then talk about reimagining. How can we rebuild a democracy or rethink about democracy or rethink about how it is that we get along with each other? Oh no, oh no, the batteries all came out. Oh no. Okay, so this works, but could you go to the next slide? Because, yeah, can you put that together? When in doubt, just give something to someone else to do it. Okay, sorry. So this is the institutional compass. This is the background to it. Unlike a regular compass, I have one in my pocket, all right, which has north, south, east, west. This one has 3 compass points. One of them is harmony. Everything is going well. It's easy. It's light, blah, blah, blah. The second one is discipline, going clockwise around the compass. Discipline is when there are rules, when there's rigidity, there are real things that we have to face. There are real problems. There's disease, there's crises. And the third one is an excitement, which is when things are in flux, there are a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of passion, a lot of emotion. So I want you to bear this picture in mind, and it won't go away, it'll come back again. So what does harmony really mean? Harmony for the economy means steady state, fixed fees, normal maintenance costs, predictability for predictability. For society, it means good health, preventive health measures, people feel safe, so there are normal levels of security. Children receive a good basic education so that they're integrated in society. They all have a common basis of knowledge. Local customs are maintained, families are stable, people live in the same place for generations, so they're familiar with the ecology, they're familiar with each other, they're familiar with each other's families. Sometimes this can become a bit incestuous, but that sort of stability is part of harmony. For the environment, harmony means a healthy ecosystem. So there are ecosystem health measures, and we're talking about good resilience, we're talking about native species, vitality, and biodiversity. Discipline. What does that mean? For the economy, discipline means lost money. You know, sometimes, you know, the $20 bill just falls out of your pocket and it's gone. Wasted money. So you make a bad decision. Bankruptcy, penalties, right? This is just part of the world that we live in. For society, it means illness and death, depression, suicide, crime, violence, children failing in education. Local customs or languages are lost. For the environment, discipline means ecosystem collapse. That means that we've passed the threshold of resilience. Native species become extinct from the area. There are more invasive species, more disease, smaller species. There's a direction to ecosystem collapse. Nature doesn't go away. So even if you completely raise a natural area, nature will bounce back, but it will bounce back in a different way. Excitement. So excitement in the economy means investment, and this can be high-risk investment or low-risk investment. We have fluctuating prices. Now, what fluctuates sort of depends on the economic climate and what's going on in the world. Instability in the market, and new economic inventions such as the Bitcoin, right? The Bitcoin changed a lot of things. For society, it means new technologies, new medicines and facilities, new measures for protection, high levels of education. So it's kind of exciting to have university graduates and postdocs and high-level research. Sports teams, competitions, festivals, international exchange, because they're all very stimulating. They change things. They make us think. They make us reflect. For the environment, excitement means man taming nature to improve it or enhance it. So we're talking about diverting water, soil, or air systems. It means in agriculture, it means that we're actually planting things in order to eat for our own good. And the more organic, the closer it is to harmony. And the more industrial, the closer it is to discipline. So for example, compare a quiet, well-ordered society. Take Holland or something. I mean, Holland's pretty quiet and well-organized. Compare that to a society at war with food shortages, refugees in movement, medical needs. And again, compare this to a dynamic, changing society with a lot of investment from government, citizens changing jobs and career paths. They travel and they move. So these are the three qualities. So we can understand society in these three qualitative ways. And different countries will have, in different stages of their history, will experience these different qualities. So how do we construct a compass? We collect data. And the data, we can collect any data that can be given a length, which means a sense of amplitude. How important is this? How big is this, etc. And it can be given a quality degree. Does it fall in harmony? Does it fall in excitement? Does it fall in discipline? And if it's in excitement, does it go towards harmony or not? So that's the degree on the circle. The data is analyzed. So each data point, so I've trained students to do this, each data point is accorded a length. How important is it? How big is this? And it's also given a degree on that circle. Then an algorithm is applied using very simple mathematics. There's a computer program that runs the algorithm for you. And the whole set of data is represented as a direction on the compass with a length. The whole set of data. So we're comparing environmental data, social data, economic data. It's all put in the mix. So here's a compass reading for a region that tells us in which quality direction the region is heading overall. So this one is in discipline, it's fairly long, and this actually represents New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina hit it. So that's just an example. Sorry. So now let's talk about democracy. So we're shifting over from how the compass works and what it looks like, and we're now moving to democracy. This is a hypothesis on my part, is that you can have democracy within discipline, and you can have democracy in excitement. Harmony more or less guarantees democracy. But there are going to be parts of the compass where democracy doesn't exist, where you really can't reasonably say that you have a democracy anymore. And these are areas of war or of chaos and very repressive regimes. So those are the two sort of general areas on that compass where we're identifying and contrasting democracy to non-democracy, broadly construed. And if you change the definition of democracy, then those lines might shift a little bit. Okay.
So sorry for the interruption here, Mauricio from PSO. We need to close the session in about 4 more minutes. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry
thank you
that.
for using 3 seconds of those 4 minutes. Okay, so we can participate. So I wanted to talk about participation. So we can participate in the data collection. So people might notice something that the experts don't notice. We can participate in the analysis, and we can make that public. We can also decide collectively in what direction we actually want to go, if it's just democracy or not. So public participation is part of the compass construction. So say you have something going in the wrong direction, then there's a distance between the direction you're actually heading in and the direction you want to go in if you want a democratic society. You can change that compass. You can rotate it. You can shorten the length and you can make it longer. How did we get the change in direction? We looked at the data to see what we can change directly or indirectly, and policy is used to change the length or degree of a key data point, the ones that lead away or towards democracy. Watch and measure the progress as the data is updated, so we can watch that compass change. And it becomes a sort of mirror as to what's going on in your society. And we might ask certain questions. Are we progressing fast enough? Who should commit to do what? In what time frame? Usually in terms of one data point or that we want to lengthen or shrink or rotate. What do we do if the person or organization doesn't meet the target? And who is the we above? So here's my recommendation. Government in any country, at any level, even a community group, can adopt the compass as a means of ensuring democracy. That's the recommendation. It's that simple. The compass is used to coordinate efforts to move a society in a quality direction. In times of crisis, the coordination is vital, so it's the coordination that counts. After crisis, the direction is the abstract expression of together purpose. Where do we want to go? And that's going to keep it going. So then I just have these 2 slides that maybe are not so important, just saying how this talk sort of relates to the other ones. But I'll stop there.